Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to pick up on the sewage dumping story again, as the government has U-turned under immense pressure from the public, who obviously weren't all that convinced that swimming in their own excrement was the post-Brexit future they were anticipating. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, due to a problem getting certain chemicals necessary for the treatment of sewage imported from the EU, due to the massive trade barriers we have erected with our extreme Tory Brexit, water companies found themselves in a little bit of a tricky situation. Last month, the government announced that they would permit water companies, once they'd obtained written permission, to discharge sewage that had not been fully treated into our waterways. Well, roll on a few weeks and it's way beyond that. We've had an absolutely... It's an exercise in Mickey taking from water companies, quite frankly. I suppose the real hammer blow for me was seeing footage from a citizen, Chris Purcell, with a drone of sewage, just sewage being pumped into a harbour for 49 hours straight. This is the site behind me here. It was an incredibly powerful sight. We'd seen the reports of beaches being closed, sure, due to public health hazard of this policy. And locals and visitors will have seen that, and that'll be a powerful image for them. But for those of us further away, just watching this footage for me was something else. Last week, politicians from across different parties, and when I say different parties, I mean all of the parties, including the Conservatives, tried to introduce an amendment to the Environment Bill that would place a legal duty on water companies to avoid this sort of behaviour at all reasonable costs. We know that flooding sometimes causes issues like this, but this is just pumping effluents into our rivers, estuaries and seas because they can. Now, I want to discuss the party political implications of this for the Conservative MPs in a moment, but for now, should we just say the government have thankfully U-turned and the amendment has, well, it's going to go through. Such was the public backlash that there was a serious risk that a lot more Conservative MPs were going to vote for the amendment once it returned to the House of Commons for the final vote. It needs to be remembered that just over 20 Conservative MPs did vote for the equivalent Commons amendment before it went to the Lords. In the face of massive public pressure, more MPs were looking like changing their minds and being prepared to inflict a humiliating defeat on the government. Obviously, we will have to see what action is taken. It's, that you can often get a situation with governments, not just this government, or this government does it quite a lot, where they're forced to U-turn on something, they're forced to U-turn on a policy, and then they wait for the bad headlines to go away, and then they just carry on as they were going to anyway. We had a similar thing with the NHS surcharge during the pandemic. All of a sudden, it seemed absolutely heinous that we should be charging NHS workers, nurses, paramedics and doctors more in taxes, just because they were foreign, more in taxes for them during the pandemic. And so the government said that they would drop it for NHS workers and didn't. They just U-turned to make the bad headlines go away. Nobody chased them up on it, didn't do it. So we are going to have to keep an eye on this. But we have had a problem for decades in making sure our waters remain clean in this country. In fact, one of the big worries with Brexit was that the EU law was the only thing keeping us in check. We had dirty rivers and seas before we joined, never mind being the sick man of Europe, we were also the dirty man of Europe. Didn't take us long to dirty them again once we left, did it? Let us hope that the public this time do not let our government slip back into bad habits. Unfortunately, public focus isn't always on things. So, naturally, the government will be taking control of the amendment now and will claim it as their own. No doubt they will boast about their tightening of environmental legislation come the next election, despite this only coming about because they were forced to. But such is politics. Now, the party politics, a bit more interesting. This will, you would think, have a number of Conservative MPs hopping mad at the government. Why? Well, not because they U-turned as such. I genuinely don't think that many Conservative MPs didn't think it was a problem to be pumping so much crap literally into our waterways. I can be quite prepared to believe that when the government announced its policy last week, that a lot of Conservative MPs would have been feeling this is not the right thing to do. But because the government wanted to oppose this amendment, Conservative MPs were ordered to defend the position to the general public. So it is part of the covenant of being an MP. Unless you're independent, if you're independent, do your own thing. If you are a candidate for a party, you are getting elected on that party's ticket. There is a certain deal there. The deal is the party gets you elected. In return, you toe the party line. That includes defending party leadership policies to the public. However, there is another implied part of this deal, is that your party leadership doesn't make you look like a massive bell end by U-turning a few days later. Because consider what's happened here. Some Tory MPs defended the government's position robustly, even aggressively in some cases. A common deflection was to blame our Victorian infrastructure. I talked about that earlier this week. Now, when water companies in England were privatised, I was quite young. I was very interested in politics, but wouldn't have been paying a lot of attention to all the details. But it was apparently sold to the public as a way to get our systems upgraded with private investment. Private companies, absolutely marvellous. Yes. They'll revolutionise it, you see. They'll replace our crumbling infrastructure and make it fit for the modern world. So why, after decades of privatisation, have those systems not been upgraded then? Why are water companies running at a loss, failing to improve that infrastructure and still paying out billions of pounds in dividends to their shareholders? It's almost like privatisation, all it really exists for is to funnel a load of money into people who've got enough money to afford shares. The government argued that eliminating sewage outflows would cost consumers £150 billion. No. How about you suspend dividends until the water companies actually deliver the service we are paying them for? See, the way a business is supposed to work, you've got expenditure, whatever sort of business you are, you've got some sort of expenditure, even I have expenditure, and then you've got your income. And what you're supposed to do is a little subtraction, nice easy maths. You deduct your expenditure from your income from the business, and what is left is profit. That's how it's supposed to work. What you're not supposed to do is you're not supposed to consider your profit to be an expenditure. You're not supposed to go, right, we have to make this much profit, and if we can't afford it with our income, well, we'll just have to do without paying the bills. We'll just have to do without doing any work on our systems. No. If the private companies cannot do what they were supposed to be doing, then the privatisation project has failed. Bring it back into public hands. How about that? But anyway, the point is that MPs had to defend pumping sewage into our rivers and seas as if it was just necessary. Look, it's just got to be done. We don't like it, but there's nothing we can do about it. More than that, a few of them even attacked anyone suggesting otherwise, as if anyone advocating clean waters was either stupid or playing political games. With this U-turn, the government are admitting that what has happened wasn't necessary. They are admitting that the original amendment is workable after all. They have made their MPs look like right cocks in front of their public. And this isn't the first time Boris Johnson has pursued what anyone with any brains could have told them would have been a deeply unpopular policy for no good reason, and made his MPs defend it in public and then U-turned. Remember when he got his MPs to try and persuade us that starving hungry children was a good thing to do? And he did that twice. He didn't learn his lesson. He did it twice. Or about how he thought it was reasonable to give nurses a real terms pay cut in the middle of the worst healthcare crisis of our lives. MPs are used to sometimes defending an unpopular policy, especially early on in a parliamentary cycle. It's on the assumption that basically the way this works is you put in this unpopular policy early on, long way from the election, and sometimes an unpopular policy is a good policy. This one is not. And you stick by it. Some opposition will say, oh, all these terrible things will happen if you do this, and you do it, and a few years later these terrible things don't happen, and you get to say to the public, look, we said it would be fine, there it is, we're now getting the benefits of it. And so it all blows over effectively. The public will have forgotten, it's all fine. That's how it works. But not only is there the possibility of an election within the next year, so this is not early on in the parliamentary cycle necessarily, but it doesn't blow over so easily when the government U-turns. Like it's child's play for rival candidates to flag up that their local MP defended the pumping of effluents into their once beautiful rivers and dismissed opposition ideas as unworkable. They said, your idea for dealing with this cannot possibly work, only to be proved wrong because the government then adopted that proposal. It makes the MP look either heartless or brainless. Neither is a good look for a politician. Sometimes both are true, but it's not a good look. So Johnson will now have a load of his own MPs demanding to know why, if he was prepared to back this move under pressure, that he didn't see that the pressure would mount to the point where it is now. You know, Johnson is once again proven to have no conviction. He pursues unpopular policies for no good reason, gets his MPs to nail their colours to a rotten mast, and then folds at the first sign of resistance. Another reminder that politics aside, he's a weak leader and a very weak head of government. He's also hurting the chances of individual MPs at the next election. Now, I don't want to generalise too much about the motivation of MPs, but if you like to pose a genuine question to an MP and to actually read their real answer, not the one they just tell you, and propose to an MP, right, you've got a choice. You can either retain your seat at the election, but your party will lose, so that seat will be on the opposition benches, or you can lose your seat, but your party will win and be in government. Well, I'm going to suggest a lot of MPs, I don't want to say most, but it may be most, but I would suggest a lot of MPs would rather be sitting on the opposition benches than watching their party in government from their sofa at home. There are a large number that will care more about their own seat, and they do not appreciate their leadership costing them a lot of credibility in their own constituency over defending policies that the government a few days later U-turns on, because that increases the chances they're losing that seat. You know, and that's why it sounded like a lot of MPs were just going to vote for the amendment after all. They're going to prioritise their seat over the government. You know, there was a very real chance of a lot of these MPs losing their seats over this, or so they must have thought. You know, Conservative voters, let us bear in mind, in their traditional heartlands, are all about the green and pleasant land, not the brown and smelly water with the odd-used condom bobbing about. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.